Hey everyone, and welcome to UK Media Warrior. Star Trek Discovery has finally been released and the first two episodes are out, and I've just watched them back to back, so I thought I'd put out my review of these two episodes as one entity rather than two separate episodes. It really was basically almost a 2-hour pilot. I think that's pretty much what they were trying to get at here, CBS. So I'm going to review these two episodes, spoiler review for these two episodes as one thing, one pilot. Okay, now before I get started, I want to make something very clear. I am a very huge Star Trek fan. I've watched Star Trek all my life. I grew up with the original series, Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, all the movies. I've loved them all. I even like the JJ reboots. I like them as sci-fi films, although I do have a lot of problems with how they look when they're put up against the Prime universe. The Prime universe being Kirk, Spock, McCoy, that sort of thing. So I want to get that out straight away. Huge Star Trek fan. So I went into this, well, obviously with all of that baggage. Now, Discovery has had a lot of problems behind the scenes. A lot of problems. Bryan Fuller, who was taken on originally as the showrunner for this show, is a huge Star Trek fan, has worked on Star Trek previously on shows and film, and he knew what he wanted and what he wanted to do. He wanted to be, from what I've read and heard, and some statements he made, he wanted to try and keep this show as authentic to the Prime universe as he could. Now, obviously, this show takes place 10 years before Kirk and Spock and their Enterprise in the original series. And obviously that show was done in the 60s. So they didn't have the technology or the money to do what we can do today. So their sets, obviously back then, and how their ships look old to us. And obviously everyone fully understood that. So he wanted to try and keep as close to that as he could, you know, to keep the aura, the feel, the love of Star Trek that he had and that he wanted to give to the fans. So that's what we expected. Then the first images and screenshots and behind the scenes photos came out for Discovery, and immediately everyone was like, well, no, this has nothing to do with the Prime universe. This looks exactly like the J.J. Abrams reboots with Chris Pine as Captain Kirk and the movies. Now, CBS stated multiple times, and they stuck to their guns, saying this series takes place in the Prime universe. It has nothing to do with the Kelvin timeline. The Kelvin timeline being the J.J. Abrams rebooted movies. Okay, so we have the Prime universe, which is Kirk, Spock, the original series, the Next Generation, Voyager, DS9, all that. That's the Prime universe. And the Kelvin timeline, which is the 3 new Star Trek movies, which got kicked off by J.J. Abrams and so on. So you've got the 2 separate timelines. But this series, Discovery, was supposed to be in the Prime timeline 10 years before Kirk and Spock. The problem is, it looked like it was set into the future. It looked like it was almost more advanced technologically than even Voyager, which is chronologically the latest Star Trek that we've seen. Not taking into account the movies, obviously, because we've got Nemesis, that was the last Star Trek movie before the reboots. So anyway, but it looks more futuristic than even Voyager, which is set more than 100 years after this show is supposed to actually take place in the timeline. So that started to cause some problems. It didn't look right. Then we started to hear things like the main character, Michael Burnham, who is the first officer of the ship, is Sarek's adopted daughter. So she will be Spock's sister. Now, in all the years of Star Trek before this, decades and decades of Star Trek before this, Spock has never had a sister, ever. He's never mentioned in books or on TV or in films. It's never mentioned. But for some reason, they've made this now canon, that Sarek actually took this young Earth child that he found in what we assume is an attack. He saved her from the destruction of her home, and mentored her and adopted her and took her under his wing and brought her up on Vulcan. But this has never been revealed before, so this came out right out of the blue. And another thing to keep in mind, Spock and Sarek, when we first see them in the original series, they haven't spoken for years. And the reason they haven't spoken for years is because Sarek wanted Spock to go into the Vulcan Science Academy. He didn't want his son to be part of Starfleet. That was the big thing. Spock decided he wanted to be in Starfleet. Sarek said, no, you're not. And Spock ignored him and went and joined Starfleet. Anyway, so they didn't speak for years. That's canon. That's in the original series. Many times it's mentioned. And yet, Sarek adopts this human kid, this human girl, puts her all the way through the Vulcan Science Learning Academy schools, and just when she's at the age where she would be going into the Science Vulcan Academy, he gives her to Starfleet. I don't know. I mean, we don't really see why here. We can only assume that he does it because she's human. He wants her to be around humans, maybe. But then why would he bring her up on Vulcan for what looks like at least 15 years, if not longer, as a Vulcan? Because she acts like a Vulcan when you first see her, when she first goes to the Starfleet vessel, Shinzon, I think it's called. I can't pronounce it correctly. But the Starfleet vessel in these first two episodes, when she first appears there, she's acting very Vulcan. So why would he want her to join Starfleet when he didn't want his son to join Starfleet? It's very confusing. Okay, so that's all said. That's all out there. But I've got to try and do this review. I've got to try and divide myself here because I was very confused. As a Star Trek fan, hoping this was going to be a good Star Trek series, I hated it. It was terrible. What CBS have basically done is they've cherry-picked little bits out of the canon of the other TV series and thrown the majority of Star Trek lore and Star Trek canon out the window and just done what they wanted. So they've basically created a new sci-fi show which on the surface looks marginally like Star Trek. It's got the Star Trek name. You can use names like Klingons and Kahless and Federation and Starfleet and that sort of thing. But that doesn't make it a Star Trek show. You can't just use the names and say, yeah, there you go. We've used the correct names. It's now a Star Trek show. No, that's not how it works. There's more to Star Trek than that, which is why it has lived and prospered so long over so many decades and has so many fans worldwide. We love it because of its depth of character, the stories, how it tackles diverse and controversial subjects. Now, okay, this is the pilot for a new series, and pilots are never good. It's very, very, very unusual to find a pilot that is. Normally you have to give a series at least 3 or 4 episodes. And I appreciate that. But this is Star Trek. And they have got so much lore to go on, to build on. This isn't like it's a brand new series with brand new visuals and everything's brand new. And they're trying to sell all this to the public, to the viewing audience. That's not the case. They've got decades and decades of Star Trek series behind them and movies that they can base all this on. They've got a solid foundation that they can bring to. And they've got a huge, already established fan base that they want to bring in to watch this show to make it a success. So you have to ask yourself, what was CBS thinking? Why did they ignore all the stuff that makes Star Trek great and just give this futuristic sci-fi show which has more to do with the Kelvin timeline than it ever has to do with the prime timeline of Kirk and Spock? Now, as I mentioned earlier, Bryan Fuller was taken on originally to showrun. He left the show back in October of last year under hazy circumstances. It was said at the time that Bryan Fuller and CBS had creative differences, which is why they parted ways. From statements that Bryan Fuller has done after he left, it pretty much seems to be that, as I said, he wanted to keep this show as close to the original timeline as possible, as authentic to the feel and the look of the Prime universe as possible. What CBS wanted was a flashy, technological, science fiction series that looked like the new Star Trek films, because they wanted to bring on board a younger audience. As if they didn't actually care about the established Star Trek fan base, they just wanted to bring on younger people. And to get younger people, we need more modern, more technologically flashy, glitzy stuff on the screen to bring them all on board. And everyone liked the new Star Trek films that J.J. Abrams did, so we'll just do more of that. And so Bryan Fuller left. And now we have Discovery. Now, as I said, I've got to try and divide myself here, because as I said, as a Star Trek fan, I hated this. But if I wasn't a Star Trek fan, this wouldn't be too bad. It looks phenomenal. Watching these two episodes back to back, it looked like a motion picture. It looked like the amount of money you would need for a science fiction. The amount of money they use for the Star Trek reboots. It looks like they put all of that into this series, because these two episodes were beautiful to watch. The visuals, the cinematography, the colour, the effects were absolutely stupendous. And I can't take anything away from CBS for that. Nothing at all. And even the acting was good. I mean, they've got Michelle Yeoh on here. I love Michelle Yeoh. She's fantastic. One of the best actresses I've ever seen. And I loved her in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and that sort of thing. So I was really, really happy to see her on here. Now, as I said, it's a spoiler review, so if you haven't watched Discovery, you really shouldn't be watching this review. But obviously at the end of episode 2, she dies. And then you're left thinking, well, they got someone with Michelle Yeoh's name and star power into this and didn't really get to do anything. She had one fight scene at the end of the second episode, and she's renowned for her fighting technique, and she doesn't really fight much. She moves around for about 1 minute and then gets stabbed by a Klingon, and that's your luck. So that was a waste. But as I say, visually, it's a fantastic show. Where it fails is that sometimes the plot is just a little bit ridiculous. And add to the fact, it's just not Star Trek. Now, as I was watching the show, I watched it through twice now. So as I was watching it, I was making notes of problems that I saw as a Star Trek fan. Now, obviously, this review is going to obviously be weighted towards that way of thinking, because I am a Star Trek fan. I can't get rid of it completely. I can look at Discovery and go, yes, it looks beautiful. But it was boring. I mean, they had a big battle in the second episode, but overall, the 2 episodes, there were long periods of just nothing happening at all. The Klingons look like lizards now for some reason, and because they made the Klingons talk all the time in Klingon, in their own language, which is fine. I mean, that was actually quite a brave decision to do, just with subtitles, talking Klingon but with subtitles. But the problem was, with all that makeup, all we really got was deep, rumbling mumbles. They were almost impossible to understand what they were saying. I think even if they'd been speaking English, we'd have still needed the subtitles. But all the time with the Klingons, it was just like, yeah, come on, let's move on, because they did so much talking, trying to establish what these Klingons were on about, and it just got boring. It's like, Michael Burnham, the first officer, obviously the star of this show, is a bit of a contradiction, because in the second episode, she's telling her captain, Michelle Yeoh, she's saying, you can't kill the Klingon leader, because if you kill him, he will become a messiah, and the Klingons will rally behind his memory, and they'll just keep fighting forever, so we can't kill him. So when her and her captain go over to the Klingon ship to kidnap this Klingon leader and bring him back to their ship, what does she end up doing? Killing him. So Yeah, I appreciate why she did it. She spent 7 years on this ship with this captain, getting to know her, befriend her. Fine. Getting in touch with her emotions. I get it. She sees her captain killed before her, and instantly, bang, she turns the phaser over to kill and shoots the guy in the back. All the emotional control has vanished. All of her argument about we can't kill this guy because if we kill him, he's a messiah and the Klingons are just going to fight forever for him. That's all gone. She just shoots him in the back and kicks off the Klingon War with the Federation. Thank you very much, Michelle Burnham. Michael Burnham. Well, I'm going to have trouble with that. Michael Burnham? Some people have said Michael is a female name. I don't know. Maybe it is somewhere in the world. I've never heard of that, but okay. I'm just going to have problems because I'm going to keep calling him Michelle. It's like my brain's thinking Michael's a bloke's name, a man's name. Anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll down my list of things I noted and I had problems with, or at least wanted to make note of about these last two parts. Okay, so bear with me and I'll try and explain as I go along. Star Trek pilots have had an issue in the past of being slow-paced and to a degree boring. The original series, the first pilot for the original series was an episode called The Cage, which starred Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike, and he was the captain of the Enterprise. Spock at that time was just a science officer, and the first officer of the Enterprise was Majel Barrett, who went on to play Nurse Chapel in the original series. But back then, the studio, after they watched this pilot, they said, well, no, it's too highbrow. People just aren't going to understand what you're going on about. We need more action in it. So they recast, they brought in William Shatner as Kirk, Jeffrey Hunter left, and they did Where No Man Has Gone Before, which had a lot more fight scenes, a lot more fisticuffs, and it was a lot more exciting. And so that became the new first episode of the original series, and it went on from there. So obviously The Cage, in the original series, the original pilot, the studios didn't like that because it was too slow and boring. The Next Generation, its pilot episode was Encounter at Farpoint. And a lot of Next Generation fans even, or Star Trek fans in general, realise and admit that that's not a particularly good pilot. It's very slow paced. It's very, again, highbrow. There's a lot of thinking to do. There's a lot of things they're trying to put over on screen for you to think about. Not a lot of action, if any at all. And it was an odd choice to my mind, but the entire first season of Next Generation I don't think is particularly good. It didn't really get good until the third season. But yeah, so again, the Next Generation and Encounter at Farpoint, their pilot was slow and boring. This pilot, as I said previously, I was bored. It was just slow. There were too many times I was just sitting back watching long scenes of talking and nothing happening. I just wanted to get to the next interesting part. You know, I understand you're trying to get these characters to come across on screen, but they didn't. Even with all the time they spent with characters talking, I still came away after these two episodes not really caring about Michael Burnham. And she's probably the only member of the crew of this ship that's going to transfer over to the Discovery. Because I'm assuming when, and again, the Discovery, this show is called Star Trek Discovery. The first two episodes, we still haven't found the Discovery yet. Now we're assuming that that's going to be the ship piloted by Jason Isaacs. He's going to have his own crew. So I'm not entirely sure all these people we saw on this spaceship and this starship with Michael Burnham in these two episodes, where they're going to go, whether they're going to come back or not. So, yeah, and not a good pilot. Slow, not much going on, visually fantastic, but other than that, no. As I mentioned previously, CBS wanted this show to be flashy and sparkly and great tech and flashy effects, and they got that. But the problem is, it looks too new. You've got this huge bridge. I mean, it's fucking huge. With all that space for no apparent reason. It's similar in size to the J.J. Abrams reboot Enterprise bridge, but it has nothing to do with the bridges in the Prime universe. The bridge of the original Enterprise, the bridge of... It's even bigger than the Next Generation bridge. And I believe that's the biggest one we've seen so far in any Star Trek TV series. It's much bigger than Voyager. It's just huge. But add to that, you've got holographic images, which Star Trek does not have in this time frame. Before, you know, even the original series doesn't have holographic technology yet. Holographic technology is still in its reasonable infancy in the Next Generation. So to say that this series, set 10 years before Kirk and Spock, has holographic communications that's instantaneous messaging no matter where you are in the galaxy, and you've got holographic display screens, that's just ridiculous. That is not canon, and they've just ignored established canon and said, we need something flashy and nice and visually looking great, so we'll just do this and sod canon. We don't give a shit about that. The spacesuit that Michael Burnham uses is almost exactly the same as something you would see in later Star Trek movies. Star Trek Next Generation movie First Contact had a similar sort of suit, but this one looked even more technologically advanced than that. This one's got like a heads-up LED display on the helmet. We've never seen that before. So this spacesuit is more advanced than a spacesuit we see in the Next Generation timeline over 100 years later. How is that possible? Carrying on with the tech, the transporter. We see the transporter room of this ship, and again, it is huge. It's like cabinets compared to the transporters we've seen on all other Star Trek series and movies. This thing is absolutely huge, and it seems to have weird, like, they look like lenses on torches, flashlights, all spread around the walls. But we've seen the first transporters we see on Enterprise. Now, Enterprise is set 100 years before Kirk and Spock. And transporters safe enough for humans are just beginning to be experimented with. And we see the transporter on the Enterprise, and it's small. It's about the same size as a transporter pad in the original series or on the Next Generation. It's pretty much the same size. The transporter pads don't change size really. From Enterprise to the original series to Next Gen to DS9 to Voyager, they're all pretty much the same size. And yet for some reason, in Discovery, the transporter room on this ship is massive. It's like open, it's like a huge hall. Rather than a transporter room, this is a transporter hall. And for no apparent reason at all. Why spend all that money creating this set, this huge set, when you can get away with just doing a normal, standard, small transporter room? Again, why? Why do that? There's no reason for it. Looking at the Klingons for a second, they make a big deal of when one of the Klingon Warriors dies at Michael Burnham's hand. They put him in a coffin and they secure the coffin to the outside of their hull, and there's this, the hull of the ship, and there's this whole ritual that they do. Now they do the death howl, I suppose you could call it, which we have established from the Next Generation. When a Klingon warrior dies, all the Klingons with him howl to let Sto-vo-kor, which is the Klingon afterlife, know that there's a warrior coming and to be prepared for him. So they've kept that bit in. But what's odd is their reverence for the body, and how later on at the end of the second episode they're retrieving bodies from space, Klingon dead, who are floating around in space. They're retrieving them for a ritual. It's established in the Next Generation and even DS9 and Voyager. It's established that a Klingon dead body has no value to the Klingons at all, none at all. Once the Klingon is dead, once his spirit has left, the body is garbage. Just get rid of it. It's of no value at all to the Klingons at all. So why these particular Klingons would have such reverence for the actual body of a deceased warrior after they've done that death howl is, again, against canon. That's not how the Klingon religion works. They just don't care about the body. The spirit is gone. The body is just a worthless carcass. Klingon cloaking devices. This big ship has a cloaking device. One of the Klingons on this ship says, "Oh yes, my leader here created this cloaking device. Look how great we are." No, Klingons don't have cloaking devices at this time. They get cloaking devices from the Romulans about 10 years later, 10, 15 years later, when the Romulans and the Klingons have a very brief ceasefire and alliance where they share technology. That's where the Klingons get cloaking technology from. They don't develop it themselves, and they certainly wouldn't have it 10 years before Kirk and Spock. So again, CBS ignoring canon. How the Klingons look. Now, there's been a lot of anger, confusion amongst Star Trek fans about why these Klingons look exactly the same as the Klingons from the J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline. When CBS have been saying, nope, we've got nothing to do, this show has nothing to do with the Kelvin timeline, absolutely nothing. Oh, the Klingons look the same as those? Well, just ignore that. And that seems to be CBS's reaction to pretty much anyone. Anyone who states, well, that's not canon, CBS is like, yeah, we don't give a shit. It's annoying because it's established in canon. In Enterprise, there's an episode that explains why the Klingons lose their ridges. In the original series, the Klingons look human, just darker skinned humans, almost Asians, no ridges. And there's an episode in Enterprise that explains why that is. There was a disease that went out among the Klingon race that was pretty much going to wipe them out, but Dr. Phlox from the Enterprise and a Klingon scientist managed to stop the disease, but not before it had physically altered how Klingons looked, and that was passed down from father to son and so on and so forth. So that's why in the original series all the Klingons you see look human, just darker skinned humans. So that's established. Now that's in the original series. This series, Discovery, takes place 10 years before the original series. So the Klingons we see here should be human-like. They shouldn't have ridges. Now, admittedly, we don't know how many of the Klingon Empire were affected by this disease. We know it was quite a bit of it, but it's possible that they managed to stop the spread of it before the entire Klingon race was changed. So I suppose you could push coincidence and just say, well, all the Klingons that appear in these two episodes were Klingons who weren't affected by the disease. You could say that, I suppose, but you're pushing it a lot, considering that all the Klingons we see in the original series don't have the ridges. Okay, let's have a look at the intro. New intro, new series, new intro, that's fine. I was curious about what they were going to use, what music, how they were going to show the intro for the credits. I don't like it. Other than like a few brief seconds at the beginning, it's not Star Trek at all. In fact, I had a very huge impression of deja vu when I was watching this, because it reminded me of the Westworld intro, the music, and even to a degree how they're showing graphics about how they build all these modern tech like the phasers and the ship and what have you. It's very similar to Westworld, where obviously the Westworld intro, they're showing you how androids are built, how they're put together and that sort of thing. So I had a very strong impression of deja vu watching this, thinking, oh my God, this feels and sounds just like Westworld. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. Vulcan telepathy. Yeah, there's a scene in here where Michael Burnham is in the brig under arrest, and she can telepathically contact and speak to in real time Sarek, who we assume is on Vulcan. No. I'm sorry, that's just not possible. Vulcan telepathy is okay, but as a rule, they have to be touching an individual for it to work, or be in very close proximity to the person they're telepathically communicating. They cannot broadcast their thoughts and have a conversation with someone 1,000 light years away on a spaceship. That I don't care if it's a part of, because they explain it by saying, oh, well, when you were a kid, I put some of my Katra in you, and that's why we can communicate. No, 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 no. It's been established through films and on the shows that a Vulcan Katra, which is his soul, a Vulcan's soul and spirit, they can put it into a person if they are dying, and then that person will carry it until it can be put into a new body or be put to rest or something. You can't just put a little bit of it into someone and then use it to do, long range communications whenever you want. That's not, that's not how it works. It's never been done at all in any of the Star Trek films or movies or books or anything. So this was just way out. Michael Burnham in the brig has a conversation with the ship's computer, about ethical protocols. I can only assume that this was a homage to Kirk, because in several episodes of the original the original series of Star Trek, and even in Star Trek the Motion Picture, he has conversations with computers and convinces them to do what he wants them to do, which normally is blow up or shut down. And it felt very reminiscent here. We had Michael Burnham, who's talking to the ship's computer about getting out of jail, and she's saying, well, don't your ethical protocols say you have to save my life, so you have to let me out? And she basically talks the computer into letting her out of her cell and saving her life. It just felt weird. I've never heard of a computer having ethical protocols like this before. Normally computers do what they are told to do. They're not allowed this ambiguous ability to decide for themselves what would be better or not. If somebody is in the brig, they're in the brig because they've done something wrong. They should not be let out unless A, B or C happen. They shouldn't be allowed to talk to the computer and bamboozle it to let them out. That just doesn't really make sense. Michael Burnham gets brought to the ship, the Shenzhou, 7 years ago by Sarek, straight from Vulcan, straight from the Vulcan Science Academy or the Science School or wherever she was. She gets brought to the Shenzhou 7 years ago. They say that multiple times. She's been on the ship 7 years. 7 years ago, Sarek brought her to the ship, gave her to the captain, and she became a Starfleet officer. And within 7 years, she became a commander and the first officer of the ship. She never applied and never went to Starfleet Academy, it seems. She just went to the Vulcan Science School and then was thrust upon this Starfleet vessel and captain, and from that point on she immediately becomes a Starfleet officer and raises through the ranks in 7 years. What? Every Starfleet officer goes to Starfleet Academy. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter if you're Vulcan, doesn't matter if you were mentored by Sarek of Vulcan or not. If you join Starfleet, you go to the Academy and then you get assigned to a ship. The Vulcans can't just say, well, I've got this girl here, she's really, really cool, she's fantastic, she can do lots of different things here. Let me put her on this ship, just take my word for it, she's fine. She'll make a great commander. There you go, bang, off you go. At the end of the episode, they've decided the best way to handle this is to transport over to the Klingon ship, kidnap the Klingon commander, captain, the guy in charge, bring him over to the Shenzhou, because Klingons would look at him then and think he's weak, and they will stop following him because these humans, who they class as weak, have kidnapped this guy and have him captive. So he's obviously not worth following. It's a solid plan. To do this, who do they send over to the enemy Klingon ship, which has loads of Klingon warriors all over it? 2 people. The captain and the first officer. Fantastic thinking, guys. That's exactly what you want to do. When you want to kidnap the high commander of a Klingon ship on a ship that's full of Klingon warriors, you need to send over the best you've got. So we'll send the captain and the first officer. So it totally cuts off our command structure on the Federation ship. No security personnel, no heavy weaponry, no big landing party. We'll just send over 2 people. That's bound to work. Yeah, not really, guys. Duh. And finally, at the end of the episode, Michael Burnham's being court-martialed. For some reason, Starfleet court-martials take place in the shadows now, with officers, backlit to look really menacing. It looks like some sort of conspiracy movie where you've got these shadowy figures in the background pulling strings and in control of everything, and she's standing there in the one spotlight. That's just not Starfleet, guys. I mean, come on. Starfleet doesn't operate like that. If you're court-martialed, fine, but you're court-martialed in a lit room where everyone can see each other, and you normally have the benefit of having an attorney to defend you. That's normally how a military court-martial goes down. So, again, it was just, I'm assuming it was just done for suspense. But once again, it's where CBS seems to have basically got rid of everything that feels Star Trek, that is Star Trek canon. They've just kept them a few names and basically just done whatever the fuck they wanted with this show. And that's why I don't think it's going to appeal to the Star Trek fan base. I honestly don't. It really didn't to me. And every review I've watched, which was done by a Star Trek fan, they've hated it. Every review I've watched done by somebody who wasn't a Star Trek fan, they like it. So you've got to ask yourself, has CBS's plan worked? Will they get fresh, new people in to watch this show, but they've ostracized and alienated the existing fan base? We're going to have to wait and see. Obviously, they've released the first 2 episodes. I'm not entirely sure when the next episodes are out. I think it's November. I think. I'll have to check on that. I'm not entirely sure. But for me, at least, that's my feeling of the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. As a Star Trek fan, I hated it despite it having beautiful visuals and looking incredible. And there is no doubt the amount of money and time they put into the CGI and the sets and you know, the uniforms and all that sort of thing. You can't knock them on that. My problems are all from the plot, the script, and how they've just ignored Star Trek. That pretty much is exactly what CBS have done. They have ignored all Star Trek that's come before. There was a rumor a month or so ago, it started circulating that this was actually a reboot rather than it, because obviously CBS have always stated up until now, this takes place 10 years before Spock, so it is in the original prime timelines I've already explained. But about 3 or 4 weeks ago, a leaked news report on a CBS News show said that this was a reboot of Star Trek. Now, after watching Discovery, I am more inclined to believe that than I am with CBS's assertions that this actually takes place in the existing timeline. I don't think that's the case at all. I think this really is a reboot, and if it is, then that's fine. That puts it on a different playing field. But if it's supposed to take place in the Prime Universe, as they've always said it was, then this fails badly. Anyway, I shall continue with reviews of this show when it carries on, but for now, that's my spoiler review for the first 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you've got different ideas about if you liked it or not, please comment below. Let me know. I'm glad to have a debate about it with you. But for now, thank you for watching. You guys take care. Until next time, let's be careful out there.